To understand what I see in American politics really doesn't take all that much work. All you need is Stephen Langer's remark, I'm not sorry for anything I did, only that had to be you. And the fact that when the administrations of the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University discovered that I had been implanted with a personality change neuroplasm, they lobbied to make it illegal, meaning I was subject to arrest for canceling an appointment um, that I had been invited to and warned off from by the same arresting agency. They made it illegal for me not to be the personality change chemical construct that they were calling privately in the writings a persona. So if we put together Steve Langer and Greg Carl, what we see is the outcome with the way that I was abused. I won't say used, abused on Penis Gabriel's album So, which is to say that they're not sorry for anything that they did, meaning they're not sorry that they used a neurochemical to personality change a deaf victim of torture and terroristic violent crime, only that it had to be me. Well, when I got to Seattle, I discovered that that was null and void. They're not sorry for anything they did, and they're not sorry that it had to be me, meaning why did it have to be me is more revealing on the West Coast than it was in Pittsburgh. The reason it had to be me was because I was white. I was groomed to have influence as a liberal. My father opened doors for black people in Allegheny County, but he was from Iowa, and they don't like outsiders, and so on and so forth. So what I'm seeing is, if you look, an explanation for why honorary the sacred African warriors, like the Chinese film actress Ming-Na Wen, who gets this credibility from Carnegie Mellon University working with Langer and Carl. Um, Honorary the African black women like Ming-Na Wen, um, who starred on Friends, one of Greta Thunberg's favorite programs. Honorary the African warrior Negro women like Ming-Na Wen, the Chinese film actress. Why they have so much moral credibility is because they work with Carl and Langer. Now, what that amounts to is that they're a gasket and a gear-headed system known as the Green Party, where celebrity comes first. And you don't take the black man's time at the open mic, and he gets 15 minutes of fame. Plus, he gets Black Lives Matters extra divvies. Bernie Sanders comes, his ability to speak to Seattle is right out because Black Lives Matter wants his bully microphone time. Well, that's okay. I don't care. I don't really need time at the bully microphone. But what she was selling was the idea that I was a racist. This was very important to them. They invested a great deal in this. So I'm deaf. I didn't know what was really going on. And I took a class finally after learning sign language, as they would take a class with Professor Sundiata, a black man, by the way, who was very distinguished professional, had studied with Malifi Asante. And he wrote on my extra credit paper about Fannie Lou Hamer, your admiration for this woman is obvious. Well, my activism for proactive activities as a journalist and editorial and in my community for black advancement was also very obvious. I always prided how I got a chance to hold hands with Ralph Abernathy. But when it came time to talk about Pittsburgh, I mentioned the black man from the area around Pittsburgh, and for the first time, a Pitt News article was ransacked, crashed, and disappeared off the computer. So clearly, there's something at work when Sunday Auto comes up against Ming Na Wen and gets mysteriously gashed in the face and then shot in his car. Now, so maybe I'm connecting the dots there. You're not supposed to read between the lines and connect the dots. So pardon me, there's no connection between those two things. Because if there is a connection between those two things, you'll see the community go berserk and they'll start dancing on the penguin's ice and saying, queer mole. Said something about an Israeli neurosurgeon who implanted a personality change chemical. That means he's to blame for what happened at the Tree of Life. Therefore, Cersei Kennedy has to pay for the death of Donnie Chen. That's called connecting the dots and reading between the lines. And they do that all the time. So I'm going to take my mental eraser and erase this idea that Sundiata was failed to grant tenure, that he was shot in his car and that he was gassed up as having anything to do with the fact that he came up against the honorary African warrior like Ming Na Wen. But we find the same thing happens out in Seattle. I took above and beyond. I mean, the only thing I go to school for is to enrich my learning so I can be helpful in my editorials. Okay, I took African American culture. I lobbied to get a course, enough registration for a course on the civil rights movement in Pittsburgh. I took African American history 1 and 2. I took African art, philosophy. I took a whole every class that was available in Black Studies, and then Native American. And I went back and forth across the country looking for a school where I could study these things. So climate change, but it makes no difference to UW Dialectical because they've already decided that I'm the white. They've already, Aaron Dixon and Angela Davidson have already closed ranks with Stephen Langer and Greg Carl and decided that it's not, doesn't matter. To them, it does. They don't have any particular sympathy for an individual, and so what they're after is the hoax. The real Nefertiti, the real eternal return of the African totality negress is Yoko Ono, obviously, of course, the billionaire kleptomaniac, Trumpetoonism in New York's mecca of, the Kremlinopolis. I mean, she's the one who, instead of calling the police, says somebody's been tortured. We found evidence of him. He's been trying to get help from us. Would you please help him? She called Putin and said, guess what? We've got a white, and we hate him. He's going to make a big stick for Marxism's going to help. And we're going to come to the rescue of the psychopathy that gets peddled about liberal society, the stuff about liberals being to blame for the spread of smallpox by British generals and so forth. It gets the antagonist that kind of to the mind to stand in line with Martin Luther King year after year after year, and then being told that the purpose of this was to burn you at the stake as a white settler who must pay tribute to a Burmese dacoit running around who supported the bombing of Russia and Syria because he's an honorary of the sacred African warrior in favor of allowing food subsidies for both people, which I am too. I mean, I was always sympathetic to both people. But when you lay down that white rose at the Tree of Life, you don't mean Cersei Kennedy because Cersei Kennedy was paying for Bruce Lee. And Licky Chop's point is going to has been raking in the cash with Shulman from the Postal Union from the Cook aggregates of Corona, by whom I mean the eternal Nefertiti, the eternal return of the sacred, the African negress, which of course is obviously Yoko Ono. How could the sacred, the African spiritual goddess of infinite totality be anybody but Yoko Ono. I mean, that's perfectly obvious. Never mind Ming-Na Wen. Yoko Ono is the sacred goddess. Just ask Angela Davis. Ask any AD you can find on the block. Who is the sacred, the African eternal goddess of return? It's obviously Yoko Ono. I mean, one cannot even know her name and not fathom that with the greatest of infinite totalities. So, when you start talking like one of the Italians in a Spike Lee movie, because you've been tortured, someone you love has been raped, that it doesn't matter that the person who did it wasn't black. You are a racist for saying they did. Why? Because of the amorphous sacred the African essence that is consecrated to anybody who serves Reagan under the celebrity superstate. Ming-Na Wen, the Chinese goddess, served Oliver Stone and any AD on the blocks assessment of the queer bait as a settler, um, who Chomsky and Steve Langer were hesitant to say deserved it, but Greg Carl cleansed everyone of that as the sacred, the African warrior. He deserved it because of the transference system. He took a stand against apartheid in a major metropolitan newspaper. Therefore, he is a corrupt agent of liberalism who is a racist. And the reason we know this is because of the transcendent identity of African negritude that you find in Yoko Ono and Ming-Na Wen. And they promoted each other, this network of people. If you become identified, they all stare at you like body snatchers. If you become identified with loquaciousness, do you know what that word means? Lucidity. Do you know what that word means? Understanding and knowledge and study of what happened in the United States of America that brought about prioritizing affirmative action and black advancement and why that was such a good thing to have happen. You have to immediately vie with their cylindrical hate system about you yourself. And when they come around, let me tell you about some of the earliest sacred African warriors I met in the city of Pittsburgh. They were white boys named Pittman who broke into our house, ransacked our house, um, entered my sister's room, and terrorized her after terrorizing me after school when I was locked out of a church by the Sacred the African White Warrior. I mean, Sacred the African Warrior, honorary the Sacred the African Warrior, working with Reverend Harold Tingsler's someone, Sean Brooks, who convinced penisgabriel that their Sacred the African Warriorness could pull off targeting the implant that they had implanted from the sacred, the Israeli victimhood of Wattenmaker's refrigerator at the University of Pittsburgh, implanted in the queer bait, so they could attack it with a hooker from Oxford, who's now married and whose husband has friends who will poison me in the mouth for the sacred, the African warrior equity system of UW dialectical. These men kidnapped me, they tortured me. They followed me around in stolen cars and brutally kidnapped and gassed me. They humiliated me, virtually defecated. They defecated on tables, but see, because I said I questioned Reagan, their defecating on tables was not sacred African warrior. It was um, uh, it was subordination to Nancy Reagan's Great Highness. Yep, yep. And they when they made their famous Jaime Carbonell tape for the Neva Corporation, which was from speak memory, like Vladimir Nabokov said, they discounted the nasal sound and the involuntary implanted so-called quote personation of Brecker. And he was Jewish, so it was sacred that he would say things like that he would drag the queer bait through glass, which was one of the nicer things that they did to me. And everybody started laughing. I fully expect Attenborough's favorite little girl to clap, clap for Brecker because he dragged the queer bait through glass. That's the nature of these people. And, it's not going to be, obviously, I'm not going to have an outreach to help me from someone like who was in on this in Russia. I mean, I have my dignity, I have my autonomy. And I believe what I wrote in my papers about African American. I mean, Cindy Lauder was right. My admiration for Fannie Lou Hamer is very deep and abiding. I think what she did was one of the most magnificent moments of American heritage. But I mean, she sings this little light of mine on the Smithsonian records. She used to go on the march. She was sharecropper's daughter, about 19 children. I can rattle off quite a bit about these people because I studied them and read them. I've read tons of them. And even though my memory's not that great, I remember a great deal about all of these people. And I'm not going to promote it because of the system, the maniacal contraption that UW Dialectical has built. And the Zork idea, the anybody who survives Trump with Trumpy Tune money and the Great American Arc of Colors, which was put together in the name of America by German Green Party, who stamped my don't know who on my father's obituary, and so various other sacred, the African Yoko Ono with totality, transcendental emanations that have taken place for the honor of the African negritude. Just what Greg Carl called being subsumed into a larger structure dominated by the adversary. Well, the Pittmans used to stick me up for lunch money. That's what the African warriors, anyone named initialed AD around town, had in mind with their licky chops. Therapy, they called it. Making child porno and selling it to Yoko Ono because of a maritime um, mobster bounty that she had put on the contract, the hit contract that she had put on the queerbait child of one of the voices from the fleets at sea. It's a World War II vendetta system. But of course, you can count the vendettas. Magna Wen has a sacred the African American vendetta. Who knows why? Because I didn't want to kiss her. You could go through the roster of ethnicities who have been anointed sacred the African vessels of sacred truth, which Sunday Order is denied. Like he got tender pulled up from under him because he said something that went against the Taliban of Mignon.